Some of the most important truths of the Christian faith come to us in statements by Jesus or elsewhere in the New Testament, statements that seem to us backwards or opposite of what we think they might be. They take interpretation, they take talking about. And today we're going to talk about one of those statements. Jesus, a few times in the Gospels, and here in Matthew chapter 19 and 20, there's a certain phrase that Jesus uses that seems backwards. He says, the last will be first, and the first will be last. So here we want to talk about a certain parable that Jesus gives, and at the end of that parable, he says that phrase. A parable is a short, fictional story told by Jesus or whomever to drive home a certain point. And here in Matthew, Jesus tells the following parable. I'm going to paraphrase it so it's a little bit shorter so we can talk about it here. But it's a story of a vineyard owner and people that he wants to come and harvest those grapes and what he ends up paying them. So in this parable, the vineyard owner goes into town at the beginning of the day, and his vineyard is ripe, and so he says to the people there, will you come and for $100 spend the day helping harvest these grapes? So a bunch of them come back to his vineyard and they start to work. Later in the morning, the vineyard owner goes back into town because he needs more help. And he says, is there anyone else out there who will help to harvest these grapes? And more come for $100 apiece. He goes back after lunch and does the same thing. He goes back later in the afternoon and says the same thing. And then he goes back a last time towards the end of the day and says, is there anyone who will help harvest these grapes? And some come late in that day, and they help for the remainder of the day. And then the vineyard owner, after all of the work has been done and the grapes have been harvested, he goes to all of these laborers and he gives them all $100 apiece. Now for those who were there early in the morning, they sort of scratch their heads and they say, well, I was here all day. Why is the person who came at the 11th hour getting the same amount of money that I get? And there was grumbling amongst them because they were comparing how much they had to the other person. They didn't seem that it was fair. Backwards, opposite, didn't square up with logic. And in this parable, the vineyard owner says, don't I have the right to give what I want? And didn't you agree to come for $100? Or are you envious simply because I am generous? So the point of this parable actually has something to do with salvation. It's not just about life, although it is about life also. But we know it's about salvation because Jesus starts the parable, or even before the parable, talking about the renewal of all things. He's talking about the time at the end of the age when heaven comes and God makes all things right. And so this is an analogy to salvation. The reward that people get for working is the heaven that they will get eventually. Those who are laborers are those who are chosen by God to be workers and to be disciples of His. They come maybe early, maybe middle of the day, or maybe late, but they are workers of His, they are disciples of His, and they work towards this reward. Now, some people come to faith in Jesus early on in their life, in the morning. Those are the people that the vineyard owner went to early in the morning, and they work their whole lives, or they work the whole day. Some people, like me, come to faith earlier in life, but not at the beginning of life. I became a Christian when I was in my teens. Some people become Christians later in life. Some people become Christians at the end of their life. But there is the same reward for all of them. The same heaven is rewarded to all of those who are called by God and who receive that call and end up working in His vineyard. And it's okay for God to give the same reward to everyone, no matter whether they come early, middle, or late in life. We shouldn't be envious of someone else simply because God is generous. We should be thankful, and that's the real point of this parable. We should be thankful for what God has given us. Isn't it enough that we get to have a relationship with Him, the vineyard owner? Isn't it good enough that we get to work with Him? And isn't it good enough that we get some sort of a reward for what we do for Him? For the fact that we are laborers in His vineyard? Maybe we shouldn't get anything at all. But he chooses to give those things to us, and we should be thankful. And that is the point of this parable. One of my favorite phrases is this. It sort of sums it up, because sometimes we get into this comparison game which makes us grumpy, like these people were grumbling towards one another because of who got paid what. And the phrase is simply this. I hope we take this to heart. Comparison is the thief of joy.